A simple woman forced to solve calculus. To mock her but her genius shocks. Everyone Sarah Miller adjusted her. Simple beige blouse as she walked toward the imposing glass building of Chicago. University's mathematics department at 34 she looked out of place among the stream of younger students hurrying to their classes, her hands fidgeted with the strap of her worn leather messenger bag, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. You can do this, she whispered to herself, tucking a loose strand of her light brown hair behind her ear as an administrative assistant at a small insurance firm. Sarah had never stepped foot inside a prestigious university classroom until today. The opportunity had come unexpectedly, a pilot program seeking exceptional mathematical minds without formal credentials discovered through their online problem-solving competitions. For years Sarah had kept her passion for mathematics hidden. During lunch breaks while coworkers chatted about weekend plans, she'd quietly worked through advanced calculus problems at night. After finishing her data entry tasks, she'd spend hours on mathematical forums solving problems that stumped PhD students. The program is highly selective, Dr. Hayes had told her over the phone last month, but your solutions to our online challenge were remarkable. We'd like to offer you a chance to audit some advanced courses with the possibility of a scholarship. Sarah had nearly declined. Who was she to sit alongside brilliant students with proper educations, but something, perhaps the same curiosity that had led her to teach herself differential equations from library books, pushed her to say yes. As she approached the building, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. Simple clothes, minimal makeup, nothing that screamed mathematical genius, just an ordinary woman with an extraordinary mind that few had ever noticed. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into a world she'd only dreamed about. The halls echoed with conversations about theorems and proofs, students clutching expensive textbooks she'd only accessed through library loans. Room 307, she muttered, checking the small campus map she'd printed out. Advanced calculus with Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Even Sarah knew that name. Dr. Blackwell's textbook sat on her nightstand, dog-eared and filled with notes. The woman was legendary in mathematical circles, brilliant, demanding, and according to online forums, merciless to those she deemed unworthy. She found the lecture hall and paused outside the door, her heart pounding inside. Was the world she'd always wanted to be part of, but had never believed she could enter. Now or never, she whispered and pushed open the door. The lecture hall fell into an immediate hush as Sarah entered. Rows of students in designer clothes and casual but expensive attire turned to stare at the newcomer. She felt immediately out of place in her simple beige top and modest slacks, clothes chosen for comfort rather than to make an impression. Sarah slipped into an empty seat near the front, ignoring the curious glances. A young man in a cashmere sweater leaned away slightly as she settled in, as if afraid her ordinariness might be contagious. Is this seat taken? She asked politely. No, he replied curtly, turning his attention back to his sleek tablet. Sarah pulled out her notebook, paper not digital, and arranged her collection of carefully sharpened pencils around her. Students whispered, their voices carrying just enough for her to catch fragments. Part of that new program, no formal education. Why is she even here? She kept her eyes fixed on her notebook, pretending not to hear. This wasn't the first time she'd been judged for not fitting someone's expectations. The lecture hall was impressive, stadium seating facing a wall of chalkboards, the kind Sarah had seen only in documentaries about prestigious universities. Above them hung portraits of renowned mathematicians, all men in serious poses, their contributions to mathematics immortalized in gold plaques. A young woman with designer glasses, 2 seats over, leaned toward her friend. Dr. Blackwell is going to eat her alive, she whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. She doesn't even allow grad students to speak up without permission. $10 says she leaves crying before class ends, her friend replied with a smirk. Sarah's fingers tightened around her pencil, but her face remained passive. If they only knew how many nights she'd stayed up until dawn working through Blackwell's most challenging problems, published in mathematical journals, not because she had to, but because the elegance of advanced mathematics filled a void inside her that nothing else could. The side door opened and the room Fell completely silent Dr. Elizabeth. Blackwell strode in her blonde hair, pulled back in a severe bun her tailored. Black blazer and crisp white shirt. Radiating authority behind her followed a younger woman with a kinder-faced Dr. Patricia Hayes, the one who had called Sarah about the program. Dr. Blackwell placed her leather portfolio on the desk and surveyed the room with piercing blue eyes. When her gaze landed on Sarah, something shifted in her expression. Surprise followed by the faintest curl of her lip. Welcome to advanced theoretical calculus, she announced, her voice crisp and commanding. For those who belong here, this course will challenge you to the limits of your mathematical abilities. Her eyes returned to Sarah. For those who don't, well, the drop period ends on Friday. The implied message couldn't have been clearer. Sarah sat up, straighter, determined not to be intimidated. She belonged here, perhaps not by the traditional path, but by the one quality that should matter most, her understanding of mathematics. Little did she know that Dr. Blackwell was already planning to make an example of her. 20 minutes into the lecture, Sarah was completely absorbed. Dr. Blackwell, for all her intimidating presence, was a brilliant teacher. Her explanations of complex multivariable calculus flowed with a precision and clarity that made Sarah's heart race with the pure beauty of the mathematics. She scribbled notes, frantically connecting concepts she'd taught herself with the formal frameworks Blackwell presented. Occasionally, Sarah would spot a pattern or connection seconds before Blackwell revealed it. A small thrill coursing through her each time the traditional approach to this partial differential equation, Dr. Blackwell explained, chalking elegant symbols across the board, requires careful application of the chain rule across multiple variables. Sarah nodded unconsciously. She discovered a shortcut for these particular types of equations last year. After weeks of late-night experimentation, her method bypassed several steps without sacrificing accuracy. Something to add, Ms. Miller? Dr. Blackwell's voice cut through Sarah's thoughts like ice. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Sarah, who realized too late that her nodding had been noticed. No, Dr. Blackwell, she said quietly. I was just following along. Dr. Blackwell's eyebrow arched. Indeed, you find advanced dimensional analysis so intuitive that you're nodding along like it's elementary arithmetic. A few students snickered. Dr. Hayes, standing near the window, frowned slightly. I didn't mean to, Sarah began, since you seem so comfortable with the material. Dr. Blackwell interrupted. Perhaps you'd like to show us how to solve the problem I was about to present. She gestured to the board where a complex equation sat. Unsolved. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The equation wasn't impossible, she could see. The approach needed but performing under the scrutiny of 30 pairs of judging eyes. And Dr. Blackwell's icy stare was different from solving problems alone in her apartment. Sarah hesitated. As I thought, Dr. Blackwell said, dismissively, turning back to the board. This program may be admitting people without proper credentials, but some foundations simply can't be skipped. Dr. Hayes stepped forward. Elizabeth, perhaps. No, Patricia. Dr. Blackwell cut her off. These students deserve to understand the difference between real mathematical training and hobbyist enthusiasm. She turned back to Sarah, her eyes cold with challenge. Ms. Miller, I insist, show us your approach. The student beside Sarah whispered to his friend, this is going to be a train wreck. Sarah closed her notebook slowly. The equation on the board was challenging, but she recognized its structure similar to ones she'd worked through in Blackwell's own textbook, the very one she'd saved 3 weeks' salary to buy secondhand. She stood, her legs steadier than she expected. The walk to the front of the classroom felt endless, each step accompanied by the weight of doubtful stares. When Dr. Blackwell handed her the chalk, their eyes met briefly, and Sarah saw it, the expectation of failure, the readiness to use her as an example of why outsiders didn't belong. Sarah turned to face the board, the equation looming before her like a mountain to climb in front of an audience expecting her to stumble at the first step. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Miller. Dr. Blackwell said, her voice dripping with false encouragement. Or perhaps you'd prefer to take your seat. Sarah raised the chalk to the board. The chalk felt cool against Sarah's fingers as she studied the equation, a particularly nasty multivariable calculus problem with nested integrals and a tricky substitution requirement. She recognized It has a variation of a problem from Chapter 7 of Blackwell's advanced textbook, but with an added complexity that made the standard approach tedious. The silence in the room was absolute. She could feel Dr. Blackwell's presence behind her, practically radiating satisfaction at what she assumed would be Sarah's imminent humiliation. Someone coughed awkwardly in the back row and a pencil dropped with a sharp clatter. "Today, Miss Miller," Dr. Blackwell prompted, her voice carrying a hint of smugness. Sarah took a deep breath. She understood the problem completely, not just the mechanical process of solving it, but the underlying principles, the mathematical landscape it inhabited. During those solitary nights working through problems by lamplight, she had developed an intuition that went beyond textbook methods. She began to write, her handwriting neat and assured. The first step was conventional. She set up the approach the way any trained mathematician would, but at the third line she pivoted, employing a substitution that was an obvious one that simplified the nested complexity. Behind her she heard a subtle intake of breath from Dr. Hayes. Sarah continued, her chalk moving steadily across the board. She wasn't just solving the problem, she was finding the most elegant path through it, where the textbook method would require 15 steps of careful manipulation. Her approach collapsed the solution path to 8 as she worked. A strange thing happened. The whispering stopped, the shuffling of papers ceased. The entire lecture hall seemed to hold its breath, watching as this ordinary-looking woman in her simple beige top dismantled a complex mathematical challenge with the precision of a master watchmaker. 5 minutes in, she heard Dr. Blackwell's shoe tap against the floor once, twice, the only outward sign of her growing unease. Sarah paused at a critical juncture, double-checking her work in her head, then proceeded to the final transformation. The last few steps flowed from her chalk like water finding its path downhill, inevitable, natural, perfect. She boxed her answer and placed the chalk in the metal tray with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silent room. Only then did she turn around. Dr. Blackwell's face had lost its smug certainty, replaced by something harder to read, surprise mixed with reluctance. She stepped forward, scanning the solution with narrowed eyes, looking for any error, any opportunity to reassert control. Dr. Hayes moved closer to the board, her eyes widening slightly as she traced Sarah's solution path. "This approach," she said softly, "it bypasses Peterson's method entirely." She turned to Sarah. "How did you see this connection?" Sarah clasped her hands to keep them from fidgeting. "The equation structure reminded me of Carrar's optimization framework. I noticed that if you transform the variables using a modified hyperbolic substitution, the nested integrals simplify." A student in the front row leaned forward, his earlier disdain replaced by curiosity. "But that's not in the textbook." "No," Sarah acknowledged quietly. "I worked it out while solving similar problems." Dr. Blackwell's lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't expected this, not just a correct solution, but an elegant one that improved upon standard methods. For a moment the classroom remained perfectly still. The power dynamic shifted in a way no one had anticipated. "An interesting approach, Dr. Blackwell finally said, her voice tight with forced neutrality. Though unconventional methods can sometimes lead to errors in more complex applications, it was as close to an acknowledgement of correctness as she seemed willing to give. But Sarah didn't need more. The equation was solved, the answer verified by Dr. Hayes's approving nod. "May I return to my seat?" Sarah asked politely. Dr. Blackwell gestured curtly, already turning back to the board, desperate to regain control of her classroom. But something fundamental had changed, and everyone in that lecture hall knew it. As Sarah walked back to her desk, she noticed that the student who had leaned away from her earlier had shifted, making more room for her. A small gesture, but symbolic of the larger transformation taking place in that room. "Before we conclude today," Dr. Blackwell announced 30 minutes later, her composure fully restored, "I'd like to introduce a more challenging problem, one that illustrates the limitations of intuitive approaches." Her eyes flickered briefly towards Sarah, and the message was clear. "Round 2 on the board." She wrote a new equation, far more complex than the first, a multidimensional integral with what appeared to be a degenerate boundary condition. "Perhaps Ms. Miller would like to demonstrate her technique again," Dr. Blackwell suggested, her tone making it clear this wasn't Really a request Sarah felt dozens of. Eyes turned to her again, but this time, the quality of attention had changed. There was curiosity now even. Anticipation. The student beside her who had ignored her earlier actually turned and whispered good luck. As Sarah rose to approach the board again, Dr. Hayes stepped forward. Elizabeth, we only have 5 minutes left in the session perhaps. This problem would be better addressed. Next class, I believe Ms. Miller's demonstrated facility deserves further exploration. Dr. Blackwell replied smoothly, unless she feels the challenge is beyond her capabilities. It was a trap. Carefully laid refuge and confirmed Dr. Blackwell's belief that her earlier success was a fluke. Accept and potentially stumble on this deliberately more difficult problem with insufficient time. Sarah took the chalk from Dr. Blackwell's outstretched hand. I'll try, she said simply as she studied the new problem. Sarah realized its true complexity. This wasn't from any textbook. It was likely something Dr. Blackwell had constructed specifically to be misleading. The apparent approach would lead to a mathematical dead end. Sarah started working, aware of the clock ticking down. She set up the standard approach, but then paused, her chalk hovering over the board as she considered there was a hidden symmetry in the problem, one that would be easy to miss if you were rushing behind her. Dr. Blackwell checked her watch pointedly. 2 minutes left. Ms. Miller, instead of continuing down the conventional path, Sarah suddenly shifted gears. She rewrote the problem using a different coordinate system, one that revealed the underlying structure. Several students gasped softly as they realized what she was doing. Working quickly but methodically, Sarah transformed the seemingly impossible problem into something manageable. Her chalk moved across the board with growing confidence, each step revealing more of the elegant solution hidden within the deliberately obfuscated problem. Just as the clock hit the hour mark, Sarah placed the final line, enclosing her answer in a neat box. She turned around, slightly out of breath, to find the entire class staring at her in stunned silence. Dr. Blackwell stared at the solution, her face unreadable. She stepped forward to examine it closely, checking each step with narrowed eyes. That's Dr. Hayes breathed, stepping closer. That's brilliant. You recognized the embedded Jacobian transformation. Dr. Blackwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A creative approach, she conceded, though the word seemed to cost her class. Dismissed as students began gathering their things. The room buzzed with excited whispers. Sarah returned to her seat, feeling strangely calm despite the tumult around her. That was incredible, said the young man who had initially moved away from her. How did you learn to do that without formal training? Before Sarah could answer, another student leaned across the aisle. Could you explain that last substitution? I've never seen anything like it. Suddenly, Sarah was surrounded by students who had ignored her just an hour earlier, their faces now alive with genuine interest. Even those who had whispered about her were watching her with newfound respect. At the front of the room, Dr. Blackwell gathered her materials, her movements sharp with barely contained frustration. Dr. Hayes approached Sarah with a warm smile. Ms. Miller, could I speak with you? In my office, I believe we need to reconsider your position in the program. The buzz followed Sarah into the hallway. As students dispersed to their next classes, some lingered, watching her with newfound curiosity as she spoke with Dr. Hayes in a quiet corner away from the main flow of traffic. What happened in there? Dr. Hayes said, her voice warm with admiration, was nothing short of remarkable. Your intuition for complex analysis is extraordinary. Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ears, still processing the dramatic shift in how everyone was suddenly treating her. I just see patterns, she said simply. Numbers have always made more sense to me than people. A few feet away, Dr. Blackwell emerged from the classroom, her posture rigid when she spotted Sarah talking with Dr. Hayes. Her lips thinned, but instead of walking away, she approached them directly. Miller, she said, her tone formal, your performance today was unexpected. It wasn't an apology. Sarah hadn't expected one, but there was a hint of something like respect buried beneath the coolness. Thank you, Dr. Blackwell, Sarah replied. Evenly, your second solution, Dr. Blackwell continued, utilized a transformation that isn't taught until graduate-level theoretical mathematics. May I ask where you encountered it? Sarah met her gaze steadily. I didn't encounter it anywhere. I derived it myself when working through problems in your third. Textbook the standard approaches seemed. Inefficient Dr. Blackwell's eyebrows rose. Slightly for the first time she seemed to truly see Sarah not as an interloper, or an anomaly, but as a mathematician. See, she said finally, well, I look forward to your continued participation in the course. With a curt nod to Dr. Hayes, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Dr. Hayes smiled, coming from Elizabeth. That's practically a standing ovation as they discussed the details of Sarah's potential transfer from auditing to a formal scholarship track. Students from the class passed by, several nodded acknowledgement at Sarah. One even stopped briefly. There's a study group that meets Thursdays in the mathematics commons, he said a bit awkwardly. We could use someone with your insight. Sarah blinked in surprise. I'll think about it. She managed Eunice to such inclusion by the time she'd finished her conversation with Dr. Hayes and walked through the mathematics building toward the exit. Word had already spread. Students she'd never met glanced at her with interest. A professor she passed in the hallway did a double take after Hayes greeted her by name. She wasn't naive enough to think one day had changed everything. There would still be those who doubted her, who would claim her success was a fluke or try to undermine her in other ways. Dr. Blackwell had relented today, but academic politics were complex and often unforgiving. Yet something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, Sarah had demonstrated her abilities not in the safety of anonymity, but in the spotlight of public scrutiny, and she had thrived. Evening sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the mathematics building as Sarah pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped outside. The campus had quieted. Most students already departed for dinner or evening activities. She paused on the wide stone steps, taking a moment to absorb everything that had happened this morning. She had walked into that building expecting at best to be tolerated as an oddity, the administrative assistant playing at being a mathematician. She had braced herself for dismissal, for confirmation of the doubts that had haunted her for years. Instead, she was walking out with Dr. Hayes's promise of a formal scholarship recommendation and an invitation to submit her alternative solution methods to the department's research journal. Her phone buzzed with a text from her co-worker at the insurance company. How'd the fancy math thing go? Did they speak in tongues? Sarah smiled, trying to imagine how to describe her day. How could she explain the feeling of finally being seen, of watching the doubt in people's eyes transform into respect? It went well, she typed back. I think I might be making some changes soon. As she descended the steps, she noticed Dr. Blackwell exiting through a side door, heading toward the faculty parking lot. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. There was no smile, no acknowledgement, but there was recognition, not as an intruder or an anomaly, but as a fellow mathematician. Sarah continued down the path toward the bus stop, her steps lighter than they had been in years. Today hadn't erased a lifetime of barriers or solved all the challenges ahead, but it had proven what she had always secretly believed, that true ability couldn't be defined by credentials alone, that passion and perseverance could open doors that seemed permanently locked. She belonged in that world of complex ideas, and elegant proofs had always belonged there. And now others knew it too, in a world that often judges talent by the credentials that frame it. Sarah's story reminds us that genuine brilliance can emerge from unexpected places. Her journey from self-taught enthusiast to recognized mathematician didn't happen because she conformed to expectations, but because she refused to let others define her capabilities. When faced with a challenge designed to expose her as an imposter, she didn't shrink away. Instead, she demonstrated that understanding doesn't always follow traditional paths, that insight can be developed in quiet moments of personal dedication, as powerfully as in prestigious lecture halls. For every person who's been told they don't belong, who's been judged by their appearance rather than their abilities, Sarah's quiet triumph offers a powerful reminder: true genius doesn't need permission to shine. If you found this story inspiring, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their talents matter regardless of how they acquired them. Remember, sometimes the most extraordinary minds come in the most ordinary packages, and acknowledging that truth might just change how we see the world around us.